Hi, I'm Jess Minton, and I'm a technical project manager at DAS42. Today, I will be speaking with Logan Guerry about all things agentic AI and its relationship to marketing and customer data.
Awesome. Hey, everyone. My name is Logan Guerry. I'm a principal consultant here at DAS42. Been here for coming up on 7 years. And I work with our wonderful clients as a bridge between our execution teams and their strategic goals.
Okay, so Logan, we'll jump right in here then. Let's talk about the identity problem. Most companies at this point claim to know their customers. We've been talking about customer 360 for many years now. And they're collecting a lot of data in service of that goal. Even so, there are a lot of marketing, sales, product leaders who could use more information to make better strategic decisions and could benefit from an even better understanding of their customer base. What's your perspective on what's happening here, and how can identity resolution and enrichment help?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's a classic problem that we run into a lot. You stated it well, right? Oftentimes, different leaders from different parts of an organization don't have access to those unified insights, and what that oftentimes comes back to is really just that they don't have tried and true pipelines or processes in place to facilitate data transfer between their teams. So, like you mentioned, the marketing leader doesn't know what the highest performing features of the current version of the product is. The sales leader might not know what customer segments the marketing team is actually seeing the best performance with. And I don't know if I'm thinking of something for the product leader. Maybe they don't have good feedback on what the sales team is hearing as the most exciting features in the product, right? And that really sort of gets at the heart, or rather the cause of the purpose of identity resolution. Whereby disparate data from those different teams, data that tracks customers or users, the products and services the company has, and all the touch points that they have with their customers and users are brought together and made available to everyone. And it can look really different across organizations or industries, and it really applies to all industries. So for example, in entertainment or media, gaming is a good example. All of a given player's touch points with that brand or with that game can in theory be linked to the first ad that they ever got prompting them to download that game. All of the conversion events that happened since then, them purchasing the game or them maybe making in-app purchases, and finally going on down the pipeline to what their actual usage journey looks like once they have the game and are a regular user. All segments of that business, right, would be able to garner insights from that, from those resolved data points, and adopt that into actionable things for their function. So, marketing strategy could be highly informed by what aspects of the game players are finding most compelling. And again, this applies to all industries. I don't want to lock it into to gaming or entertainment. To totally flip the coin in communications or telecom, there's the same struggle with understanding what is currently, from a hardware perspective, sitting in the warehouse or sitting on a service truck, or installed at a client's business or home. Just from a hardware standpoint, then that's to say nothing of the actual network traffic going through all of those. So being able to have resolved identities for that Wi-Fi router or that modem, wherever it's installed, and being able to track its history from where did I actually buy that from? Am I seeing a lot of outages with this batch of products that I bought from a certain provider? Those are the sorts of insights that really only come together when you're stitching together disparate pieces for the same entity, whether that's a user, a customer, a Wi-Fi modem, or really anything else. So yeah, all that to say, with resolution in place, you get a much more refined picture of whatever the core entity of your business is. And then it opens the door to the exciting piece, which is enrichment. And that's where we start to get into organizations being able to gain insight on whatever that core entity is, often users or customers, but using data that is not natively collected by their tool or by their organization. So yeah, hopefully that answers your question.
There's a lot to unpack there. I want to think specifically about what you mentioned around conversion events. I think that's such a powerful idea. Being able to understand which elements are resonating with your customer base can go a really long way towards making those more strategic decisions, especially when you might have many events or many touch points with a customer. Being able to hone in and find the things that mattered, I think, is very, very key. And of course, that's speaking about human behavior. Let's talk a little bit more about the difference between identity resolution and enrichment. What's the difference? How do you approach that? Like, when does a company need one or the other or both? What's the plan there when you are tackling an identity resolution or enrichment problem?
Yeah, it's a great question. I really like to think of them as additive and sequential, where resolution comes first and in many ways is sort of a prerequisite to doing good identity enrichment. If resolution, like I was saying a moment ago, is the practice or the concept of creating, a source of truth and like a golden record for each of your customers, each of your users, each of your Wi-Fi routers. It's only once you've done that and can definitively identify that user across all of your business data that you can then meaningfully look to enrich their attributes and learn more about them. So yeah, if resolution is consolidating all of the data that you have on an entity, enrichment is then, it's in the name. It's enriching via extra attributes or extra insights. What you know about that, we'll just stick with customer or user, what you know about that customer or user, and then actually acting on it. There's many ways to do it, but at the highest level, enrichment is often done through working with third-party data, collecting it in some way, and then tying it to your internal resolved customer or user profiles. And, if you're sort of reading between the lines there, a big prerequisite of that is having that single golden record for each customer user that actually has a meaningful way to be linked to external attributes that may be collected and provided on that person.
That's a great distinction. I think we talk at DAS42 a lot about having good data quality and good data governance, and it sounds like identity resolution is a place where those ideas meet and are going to enable a lot of additional analyses down the road. Can you give me an example of a business decision that changes or improves when an organization gets identity resolution right? Like, what would a company have done maybe incorrectly or not as well before versus what they're able to do once identities are resolved?
Yeah, definitely. I tend to think of it as if foundational problems with your product disappear when identity resolution is done well. And to expand on that a little bit, whenever I'm interacting, with a brand or let's say an application, and I think to myself, they should really be able to do X or to know this about me. That is likely a problem that identity resolution on the back end can solve. If I call customer support or I get on chat with customer support and they can't even find my support ticket, or worse, they can't find my order, that in all likelihood is an issue of missing identity resolution, where my customer record and the thing that says I paid for this is not actually linked to the shipping platform that hopefully has sent out my product. So they need to resolve my customer record to all of those systems, and make all of that possible to track, right? And then if I can expand a little bit more on that, if identity resolution makes those problems disappear, enrichment makes features appear. Enrichment, I guess to take the same approach, whenever I'm interacting with an application and I think, wow, that is crazy that they knew that, or that felt so personal, or they really intuited something that I never, told it. Or, more realistically, a lot of times you don't even think those things to yourself. You're just glued to an app or, glued to a product, and you're none the wiser. That is likely the result of enrichment, where that company has gained extra insight on me as a user, as a customer, and because of that has been able to make something about their product offering feel much more personal and much more valuable. So that it really stems, everything from ads that are refreshingly relevant and are actually things that I want to see or might buy, to changes in a mobile game or something that is tuned to how I play that game. Those are all examples of enrichment being employed to make the individual customer or user that their experience better.
I like thinking about that as both, step one is eliminating problems, and step two is enhancing for the customer, or in some way, whether it's the user experience or better customer service. I think we've all had those experiences that feel frustrating. And by contrast, when design is great, you don't notice. And that's kind of the mark of good design, or hopefully a good product. Now, on the flip side, it sounds like identity resolution could be somewhat invasive, right? Now, these companies know so much about you. How do you approach the privacy and ethics of something like identity resolution when you're connecting data about the same person across many different systems?
Yeah, it's like you said, probably the biggest concern in this space, and it's also the one that gets the most airtime and focus legally too. It seems like every 6 months there's a new, global data protection law in place or changing regulations. So very top of mind. And the key there really is to design and select tools that offer some really core features of your data pipelines that specifically allow you to tightly control data access, both by humans and by systems, where, especially for sensitive data types, things that can identify a person, actually link a name or any other identifying attribute, contact information, those sorts of things, where that is heavily, if not entirely, restricted. And then sort of in the same vein, augment that with the ability to still link together attributes of a given user without exposing or needing to rely on those pieces of personally identifying information. So, if you imagine, to go back to my gaming example of myself on my mobile phone, linking attributes about who I am behind that screen to me becomes a lot more palatable ethically, and certainly legally, when my actual name, my contact information, things that would let you pick me out on the street are not linked to them as well. And instead I can, customize that app experience for the user, but I'm actually none the wiser to who that user is. Designing data models, architecture, and pipelines that separate those two things, identifiable information from actionable information, is a really key piece of it. And that's something that, is one of the main functions DAS42 does. We help our clients identify what are those sensitive pieces of data, especially ones that are, protected by the growing list of regulatory bodies and laws on the books, and then building a framework that helps them restrict access to those, obfuscate them in a way that is still functional. To that end, many current cloud native data tools have good features that can help someone do that. The Snowflake ecosystem specifically makes our jobs and the jobs of anyone looking to accomplish that goal even easier, in that they have all of the leading RBAC solutions for masking and access policies, network access policies. But then it's also under the same umbrella of other features like data clean rooms and private data sharing that make transacting on that data easy and secure in the same place where you have all of the access controls in place. So
it's great to hear that this is something that we're actively thinking about because it is so important to make sure everything stays secure when it can be so very personal. Let's switch gears and talk about automated customer acquisition. Now, this is really interesting. I think every business wants to hear that they're growing their customer base. So if we think about that as something that is automated, what parts are actually automated? What are the machines, what are the algorithms doing versus what components do the human brains still need to work on?
Yeah, definitely. Look, I'll start by saying humans still have a leading role to play in defining success, in acquisition, but obviously in every other place that it feels like AI is creeping into our lives. And to that end, DAS42's position on automation and AI, and these agentic frameworks, is that these innovations should serve to augment people, not replace them. I like to think of the analogy of building a house, where previously people were needed to drill every screw, hammer every nail, level every board, do every component that brought that house together. Now they can serve pretty much exclusively as the foreman, or ideally the architect. And to run with that example a little bit more, humans can serve as the orchestrator and the manager of what's going on. In this case, in your acquisition efforts and your advertising efforts, setting targets, setting goals, but they no longer have to act as the actual executors of that plan. So jumping between analogies, they're defining what height should the walls be, or in advertising and acquisition terms, what channels and inventory align with my brand or my product. They're making decisions about how the house is built, or what an ideal house looks like, but they're not having to drive all the nails. With customer acquisition specifically, humans relay the qualitative guidelines or parameters for how those acquisition efforts should be done, what the goals are, target metrics, those sorts of things, content guidelines, purchasing restrictions, or, limitations on what sorts of audiences can be targeted. But the actual heavy lifting is done by agents and automated workflows where, agentic workers are actually executing the plan in service of that goal. So they're doing things like identifying the actual current customer segments that have really high lifetime value, or were acquired for a cheaper rate, and they're then automating all of the pieces of that campaign management or segment analysis, cohort onboarding, in service of that goal. At the end of the day, it's removing the need to do every small piece of execution and letting people focus on creative, generative, human native type tasks, defining strategy, acting as managers and overseers, not as the individual workers driving the nails.
There's a lot to think about there. I think most organizations would agree that acquiring more customers and doing so very efficiently using the power of their managers would be ideal. If you're an organization that wants to get started on that path, what does your data need to look like before you could execute automated customer acquisition as a solution?
Yeah. Look, I'm glad we actually have talked about all this in the order that we have, because the short answer is you need identity resolution down. What I mean by that is you need cleansed, consolidated, unified records for your customers or users or whatever your core entity is. And you need to be able to link those to all of the relevant touch points that you have on that customer or user. Like the example I said earlier, the original ad exposure that brought them in, acquisition details, what did their, what's their purchase history, all the details of their usage over time. And then identity enrichment just goes to further augment that, where having the data that allows you to coax out very nuanced user or customer segments and link that to lifetime value or usage trends that you want to optimize for is really key. Ultimately, it's the same data that a gold star marketing or advertising executive would want access to, so that they could inform their decisions about how to go out and acquire the ideal customer. The only addition here is that it needs to be structured in a way that automated frameworks can access it universally and make use of it all together. Most companies, like I said earlier, struggle with linking data between those systems. However, oftentimes we find that they do actually have solid domain-specific data assets. By that I mean, the marketing team has largely figured out how to track all of their campaign metrics across the different buying platforms that they use. Same thing for sales, same thing for the platform team. So they're usually very good in their silos, but they're exactly that, silos. So bringing all of that together, making that golden record internally is really the biggest prerequisite, and enrichment just pours gas on the fire.
It's starting to come together. It all makes so much sense. As a practitioner of some of these solutions, how would you advise an organization assess whether or not automated acquisition is working for them?
At the risk of giving a really simple answer, it's sort of in the outcome. Did your marketing, your acquisition, or your retention or financial metrics improve once you implemented this? The dream, right, is you stand up agentic automation and your chart just goes to the moon, right? That alone is usually a resounding enough answer. But there is another piece as well. It's the one that's I think less thought of, but it's the one that inside of an organization I think is much more felt. And it's the people who previously were doing all of that work, the people who previously were building the house and driving every nail. With this approach, you significantly reduce the cognitive load that your whole marketing and advertising team has, that comes with managing at a very fine level the execution plan for acquisition efforts. And you free those people up to, like I said earlier, become more creative, work on ambiguous tasks, tasks that a human brain is well aligned for. And again, the way that I like to think about this is as an augmentation to people. So the idea here is suddenly all of your construction workers are now foremen. All of your advertising associates can now manage entire campaigns, brands, product lines, and do all of that with much lower overhead, right? So yeah, all of that to say, it's really two things. Measuring if it's working ultimately comes down to your performance metrics, but it also comes down to the added capacity and bandwidth that your team has to do more and do it more efficiently.
I often think of managers just generally that they should think of their teams as multipliers, and they should be trying to multiply impact as a manager. And in this case, it feels like with the advent of fully automated solutions, it's more of an exponential impact as opposed to a multiplier.
Yeah, that's the idea.
What's a scenario where automated customer acquisition might go wrong? What are some of the warning signs that you watch for?
Ultimately, again, comes down to performance metrics, right? Did your average LTV of the customers you're bringing go down, or did the retention period, average retention period for that cohort go down? But there's a story behind that, and understanding what is going on in those instances is a core piece of using this framework. Ultimately, agentic frameworks are really only as good as the data that you feed them. It's a paradigm as old as like data analytics in general, garbage in, garbage out. So, if, for example, it turns out that, let's say, marital status is an attribute about your potential customers that is really highly correlated with a high lifetime value, and that isn't an attribute that you are enriching in your data set and therefore not using, that the agents aren't using in its efforts to target, you could be seeing loss and leakage in those metrics as a result of that hidden attribute, if you will. So that would show up, that would present as segments in the 35 to 45 range with median or high income. There's a lot of skew in what you're getting in high LTV. So the implication is that there's some extra attribute there that is meaningful, and we're just not capturing it. So the thing that a manager of this framework, or a marketing and advertising person putting this in, should look for is exactly that. High drift of your key metric in certain segments. That's a strong indicator that there is something there that you are missing from a segmentation standpoint that, if found, can be highly valuable, but right now is just muddying the waters.
Let's talk about agentic ad campaign management. What does this mean to you, and how is it different? How is it different from marketing automation?
Yeah, it's a phenomenal question. And I understand the confusion. I think the big difference here is the phrase agentic. The term automation has taken on a lot of meanings over the years, and I think is murkier than it ever has been. In the marketing world, it's usually used to refer to very strict rules-based execution of marketing plans. Things that look like an equation. If CPA rises above 70%, then I need to adjust this. If X, then Y. Very explicit rules-based execution. Agentic ad campaign management really flips that whole paradigm, and instead of being centered around rules-based execution, is centered around goals-based execution, whereby those agents actually act through generative means to accomplish a goal. Humans, like I've said earlier, still have a very important role to play in that, chiefly defining what that goal is, and then also putting in place restrictions that guide those agents and set hard, albeit very wide, boundaries on what they can do. So think things like, restrictions on inventory and channel to align with whatever your brand image or product is. Restrictions on audience segments, if there's certain groups of users that you don't want to or legally can't go after. All of these are examples of the inputs and the oversight that humans need to provide. But the core idea here is to allow agents to do what agentic AI agents do best, which is reason, use generative outputs to go through multi-step processes and actually execute entire marketing plans in service of a human-defined goal.
So in cases like this where we want to do agentic ad campaign management, walk me through what the AI agent is actually doing and what decisions it might be making, even with some of these restrictions that you've described.
Marketing automation, the current paradigm of rules-based execution, might look like an advertiser setting predefined rules for certain metrics like CPA or impression share, or maybe what the distribution of content looks like. Agentic ad campaign management relinquishes some of that tight rules-based control and allows agents to take action in service of a higher level goal. For example, the agent might launch its own audience tests, generate content refreshes if it analyzes and senses a drop off in click through rate, adjust the allocation of a campaign by channel or by domain or even by medium. Agentic does a lot of things, and outside of the actual execution of the plan, it also opens up the door to more conversational, natural language type analysis, where it's human overseers, the advertiser who's simply guiding and helping it or defining what the goals are, can actually ask it questions about performance or ask it to justify certain decisions. The same way that manager in past times may ask one of their associates, hey, why did you change this mix or generate a content refresh here? That same thing is possible with agentic frameworks. And the big differentiator is that agentic framework is doing it, making those decisions 100% based off of quantitative analytic insights, combined with brand and audience predisposition and controls that the user is putting in place. So it's a really powerful framework, and it really frees up marketing managers, advertising managers to do more, spread themselves across more campaigns, produce more in that regard.
We've talked a bit about where the humans are still involved, and it sounds like it's the setting goals and adding those restrictions and questioning some of the outputs when necessary so they understand the results that are coming back in. Are there other elements that should definitely be handed over to the AI agent? Like, where's the line between this job goes to the human and this job goes to the AI agent?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think one of the biggest ones that I don't believe I've touched on so far that is a very good natural fit to be handed over to the agent is essentially all content management. I know that's a crazy concept to most advertising and marketing managers, but with very few exceptions, most digital advertising content, at least if provided with just a single reference for what quality content is that is not agentically generated, most agents will do an exceptional job in generating content refreshes, properly A/B testing, while also obviously adhering to legal and regulatory and brand fit guidelines for content. Again, I know that it seems like a foreign or very lofty concept, but it is one of the strong suits of these agentic frameworks. Content generation, really anything generative, is much faster, and with every passing day is getting more and more accurate. And when combined with the ability for that agent, again, to run tests, actually measure performance on the content refreshes and other campaign decisions that it's making, it makes for a very compelling, very accurate, very performant way to manage campaigns.
All of content. Wow, that's huge. You also mentioned that there are that the agents are making decisions based on quantitative analysis and all the data that they have available. So it sounds like the other area where humans need to be involved are anytime there's something that the humans know that isn't reflected in the data, whether that is something that comes from your organization internally or external factors that maybe somehow aren't reflected. So I think that's an important maybe as well. Now, we're also talking about agents like they're people, and we know that we're talking about AI agents. What platforms are you using to build these agents? Are you building these in Google Ads? Are they Meta? Are they living somewhere else? I say living. They're not alive. They're robots.
Yeah, no, great question. I mean, you hit on some large logos that are intimately involved with most build-outs, to the extent that Google Ads and Meta are some of the leading buying platforms that companies use to actually serve and purchase and execute their marketing and advertising plans. Those are definitely part of the equation. I think it's helpful to think of those and all of the other buying platforms as endpoints, or like tentacles on this whole agentic framework, and at the core of it is where that agentic system actually lives and is hosted. There's plenty of options for where that can be done. At DAS42, we strongly believe that there are real material differentiators that make the Snowflake ecosystem the best fit for a workflow like this. For many of the reasons that we've already talked about, data consolidation, industry-leading analytics-oriented data warehousing, and a large growing repository of native AI and LLM functions inside of the tool. All of those make Snowflake a very compelling platform for the hub of this type of agentic tool or framework. And then from there, like I mentioned, any buying platform that you're working with can be integrated both as a data source and as an egress point where the agent that is running inside of Snowflake can do all of its management tasks and actually reach out to Google Ads and execute or onboard new audiences and execute new test plans. It can reach out to other services to do your content refreshes. It's obviously going to be sourcing from a lot of different places, but for many reasons, Snowflake at the center there is comes highly recommended from DAS42.
We also talk at DAS42 a lot about Snowflake being a great platform as the source of truth. So it makes a lot of sense to me that we could be running our AI agents from there as well. You mentioned connecting to other platforms. When we're talking about marketing, we're also talking about CRMs, ad platforms, lots of different systems. What's the hardest part about getting all of that data connected?
Yeah, that is a great question. At the risk of sounding redundant here, it all comes back to identity resolution. All of those systems that you mentioned, the buying platforms, CRMs, OMSs, everything that any organization would be using to track different touch points on its customers or potential customers is critical to get ingested and resolved into a single record. So the trickiest part is often actually defining those rules for consolidation, doing what we call master data management. From a technical perspective, there's never been a better time to be a data integrator, right? There are a slew of options, many native to Snowflake and other warehouses, many third-party tools that make bidirectional data traffic between your warehouse or wherever your agentic framework lives and all of those different source systems very easy, relatively easy. It is in the logic where you define how to properly resolve and condense and curate single records for those entities where there's still a good bit of ambiguity and a good bit of a case-by-case nature where that is something that organizations often have to put explicit rules around, and it's something that DAS42 frankly also helps our clients with defining the best method for properly attributing all of those different data sources to a single golden record for your customer or user.
Okay, Logan, this is your hot seat question. You will have 30 seconds to answer. If a company gets all of this right, from identity resolution, automated customer acquisition, agentic marketing campaigns, what is their competitive advantage?
Oh yeah, wow. There's a lot. I feel like I've touched on a few of them, but if I could summarize them, some of the big ones, speed comes to mind first. These agentic frameworks can operate 10, 20, 30x the speed that a traditional team and execution plan can operate at. So the time between testing new audiences or testing new content refreshes and actually getting meaningful output analysis and iteration on the performance back into changes in that campaign is we're talking minutes. So speed is a big one. Like I touched on earlier too, from a human perspective, reduce cognitive load and a significant amount of extra human bandwidth. Like I said, all of your construction workers are now foremen. All of your construction workers are now architects. All of your advertising associates are now advertising managers, campaign managers. And the economies of scale just point towards those people being able to do significantly more with this tool set. And sort of a sub bullet of that too is reduced overhead cost. Pound for pound, advertising and marketing teams can do so much more at a reduced cost with these things employed, because simply you're not spending human hours doing a lot of these more menial analysis and iteration type tasks. Humans are freed again to work on those creative, ambiguous, human native type tasks that they are wired for and enjoy more.
So everybody just got a promotion. You have a much bigger workforce, and time to execution got exponentially larger. Very exciting stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
I think that's all the time that we have. Thank you so much, Logan.
If any of this was compelling to you, or if you want to learn more about DAS42's solutions for identity enrichment or agentic ad campaign management, reach out to us over at DAS42.com/connect.